Well done.
So, welcome, friends. I'm John, Father John Deere, and welcome to this Beatitudes Center Zoom session with our special guest today, my friend Kathy Kelly. And you can find many other great upcoming Zooms at www.beatitudescenter.org, as well as my now weekly podcast, the Nonviolent Jesus Podcast. Let me remind everyone, please, to mute yourselves and to write any questions and comments in the chat link for Kathy. Hoping Kathy will speak at least 45 minutes, and then we have time for conversation and questions and comments. We'll send out the recording Zoom link, and afterwards, I'll stay on. I don't know that Kathy will, but if you want to stay on and debrief anybody, I'll be here for a bit. So let's begin with a little prayer. So I invite everybody to just take a moment of silence and to take a deep breath and notice how you're feeling today. And let's all together consciously enter into the presence of the God of peace who loves each one of you infinitely and unconditionally, and the whole human race too. And let's welcome the nonviolent Jesus here into our hearts and our circle. And just take a moment to ask for whatever graces we need to follow Jesus on the path of peace. Beloved God, thank you for all the blessings of life and love and peace that you give us. Be with us now as we reflect with our friend Kathy on your call to make peace, love our enemies, and do our part to abolish war and the causes of war on earth, that we might welcome your reign of peace and nonviolence on earth. Disarm our hearts, inspire us, heal us, enlighten us, awaken us, strengthen us, and send us to disarm the world, that we might do our part through your way of gospel nonviolence, follow the nonviolent Jesus faithfully, and do your will, and in the process be who you created us to be, your holy beatitude peacemakers, your beloved sons and daughters. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
So I'm very happy to welcome and introduce you all to my friend, um, a longtime peace activist and hero of many of us, and author and Nobel Peace Prize nominee, Kathy Kelly, to talk with us about the world of war and the causes of war and the realities and consequences of war and the way of peace. And as we're beginning, again, I invite everybody to mute themselves. Kathy Kelly, as you know, has traveled the world to the places bombed and attacked by our country over the last 3 or 4 decades in our effort to make peace and love our enemies. I think more than anyone I know. And for me, one of the great experiences of my whole life was in 1999 when I was the executive director of the Fellowship of Reconciliation. I asked Kathy to coordinate our delegation of Nobel Peace Prize winners to Iraq. It was really a great experience and a blessing, and difficult too. And I thank all of you for joining in this Zoom session and to taking a little time out of your busy lives to listen to Kathy and to reflect on the effects of our war making around the world, because the culture has trained us not to do that. As Daniel Berrigan once said, Kathy and my teacher, about the culture of war and the bomb, he said, evil covers its tracks. You know, the culture of war doesn't want the people knowing what it's doing. Whereas the nonviolent Jesus looked directly at the world of war and loved everyone directly, which meant the poor and the enemy. And he took action to defend life and disarm people and make peace. And that's what we're called to do. And, you know, as I'm thinking of Kathy here and the privilege of being with her, um, it's also utterly overwhelming. But that's not the point. The point is we go forward and do what we can anyway. And that to me is the great lesson of my friend. Um, and then if you're faithful to the journey and you let your light shine and you surrender your life to the way of peace, wow, your life can bear good fruit, as Kathy's has. So please join me, dear friends, in giving a big, warm welcome to Kathy Kelly. Welcome, Kathy. The floor is yours. You're among friends here.
Well, that's certainly true. Thank you, John, for that introduction and prayer. And, the metaphor that comes to mind is lighthouses. All of you are the lighthouses, and the beacons are shining. And I know sometimes it seems like the light shines over thankless waters, but here we are on a path. I was very grateful to Jim Forrest, who I don't really know why, out of the blue, kind of. He was a Catholic worker, mentor, an author, an artist, an art lover. And he said to me, Kathy Kelly, why don't you use great works of art when you try to communicate? Well, he picked a good time to say that because, with COVID having descended and Zoom on the rise, it began to feel more normal to me to use visual images. And so I'm going to do that quite a bit today. And that means I have to share screen. And I think actually I get more nervous about doing this than I've been when I've been in some war zones. So stay with me. I'm going to share screen and hope my PowerPoint appears. So one moment. Oh, there it is. And then I want to hope that I can go to slideshow. Oh, this is going to take me a moment, friends. Mhm. I'm going to try that again because I wasn't able to get to the slideshow part. Okay. Are you seeing an enlarged cartoon on your screen?
Yes.
So it's all working great now.
All right, thank you.
So you're up and running.
I'm up and running. Thank you very much. So this is a cartoon which just kind of struck me because I was working very hard on something called the Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal. And this really seemed to tell the story about why war, and you see that character with the skeleton on his sleeve and the word war on the back, but really you don't see a face to the character. The character almost doesn't quite look human, but the character is certainly going to be well fed, but being fed with cash, platters of cash. And then you see the tables of the onlookers: healthcare, education, sciences, art, empty plates. Notice at the education table, the young lad is there, and there are cobwebs growing around the globe because it hasn't spun. His teachers aren't teaching him. The tablecloths have patches. The healthcare plate is empty. The cello at the arts table is broken. And then you see corpulent, uh, rather happier looking people. Perhaps that's an American serving up the dollars, maybe Truman. And maybe that's a Brit serving up the pounds, maybe Churchill. And maybe that's a French person bringing in French cheese and also francs, and that might be Antoine Panet. And then in the very back, the German chap, Konrad Adenauer. Now, how do I have ideas about who all those people are? Well, because this cartoon first appeared not in a US comic manual or book, but in a Russian publication. The cartoonist is Yuli Ganf, Ganf, and the caption for the cartoon in a magazine called Crocodile, like crocodile, the caption is, "In America, at this restaurant, only one person is served." Well, when I look at this cartoon where only one person is served, I can't help but wish that the people in the healthcare and education and science and art tables would kind of get together and maybe together they could make a difference, or maybe even take a cue from Jesus of Nazareth, who went into the table of the temple and kicked the table over, turned over the table. Wouldn't that be great if something like that could happen, if these people weren't so beleaguered? And I think that's a message for our time as well, that we must learn to get together on that path and move forward, uniting our strengths and perhaps a little less competition or wariness. But I want to then go on to another cartoon, and this one also comes from a Russian magazine. It's called The Pyramid of the Capitalist System. And then the French had redone it, but it's a cartoon that shows the tiers of society. And I'd just like us all to ask ourselves, okay, in what tier would Jesus of Nazareth have been found? Would he be up at the top, with the money bags, the rulers, the false teachers, the militarists, those who are enjoying themselves, eat, drink, and be merry? Well, there they are, the group holding up the whole edifice. Now, this was first published by the Wobblies, the International Workers of the World, in 1911, but it first appeared as an image in a Russian comic manual. It wasn't quite as touched up as this, but that was in 1901. And the person who drew it was protesting the Tsar and the Tsarina. And this was what was said with the initial portrayal. The time will come when the people in their fury will straighten their bent backs and bring down the structure with one mighty push of their shoulders. I think the nonviolent Jesus would like people to stand up straight. Luke 4, I have come to preach good news to the poor, liberty to the captive, release to the oppressed, and pronounce the acceptable year of the Lord. And that will never be a time when people are bent down and wearied and oppressed. So one of the things that I think is incredibly important for me is the teachings that come from the Gospels, that stem from the Old Testament, that have been coined by the Catholic workers and by Catholicism, institutional Catholicism, portraying the works of war and the works of mercy. And my friends, today, as we think about Gaza, as we think about Ukraine, as we think about Sudan, as we think about some of the most impoverished areas of this country, the works of war are persistent. Destroy crops and land. Think about the environmental ecological collapse that the war makers are ushering in. Seize the food supplies. Oh, Gaza. Destroy homes. Scatter families. Contaminate water. Imprison dissenters. Inflict wounds and burns. Kill the living. And then the works of mercy. You can feel your shoulders go down. Feed the hungry, clothe the naked, give drink to the thirsty, visit the imprisoned, care for the sick. And we did have a moment, didn't we, when Marianne Buddy, the Episcopal bishop, was able from the pulpit in the National Cathedral to give a clarion call for mercy. And hopefully she'll be joined by many, many more voices. I was myself, I don't know, I watched MSNBC the other night. There was a parish priest from Chicago, Father Larry Dowling. I'll be sure and send him this recording. And he's somebody who has opened up his parish to migrants and just pleaded with people to live in accord with the gospel, but also learned from his own parishioners in an African-American Latino parish. And then Cardinal Cupich has finally spoken up, Archbishop Broglio, but all of the groups speaking need to say more and open up the churches for sanctuary. But part of what I think we don't always see is why so many people flee and become migrants. It isn't because they don't like their families or their homelands, but they're forced either from economic circumstances or often because we've bombed the daylights out of them and they're forced to flee. And so I think about the contaminants that lie under the ground in so many places. This is Paul Seaworthy's photograph from Afghanistan, showing how land becomes uninhabitable. And I want to say something about the spread of disease that comes from weapons being strewn all over land. Those weapons all have serious, serious contaminants. And when in a place like Rasa, the hospital networks get destroyed, and it's very, very almost near impossible to treat sick and diseased people. And the diseased people don't have access to sanitation or clean water, and they're huddled together. Then, think about that contamination. And think about how John mentioned how hard it was to be in Iraq. We saw in the hospitals in Iraq, and we heard from doctors there, that when you wreck, and sanctions did this, the possibility of people getting antibiotics, like the full round of antibiotics, it generates more pathogens. And so many Iraqi soldiers came back with diseases that were resistant to any known medication, to any antibiotics. And this kind of disease, as it washes toward the shores of Gaza and into the Mediterranean, the pathogens, the germs, what I'm saying is that the wars create superbugs that create hideous infection, incurable infection, and it doesn't know borders anymore than the clouds that came forth from Fukushima or Hiroshima or Chernobyl have respect for borders. So War Isn't Over When It's Over. That was the title of a book that Anne Jones wrote. And it seems to me that I just keep on witnessing that over and over again. And I'm just one person. I know each one of us can tell those stories of how war isn't over when it's over, whether it's from your work with people who are combat veterans and feel suicidal, or from your work with people who've sought refuge from wars, or you've been in a war zone, or your scholarship, your reading, your study. We know this to be true. And so I was very fortunate, was it yesterday or 2 days ago, to be on a call with a Swedish activist, and he showed me this artwork. And I'm so impressed by it. I mean, obviously it's the Trojan horse, and you see the Trojan horse it's got the red, white, and blue. And this is a Swedish artist, and see what's inside the Trojan horse, the nuclear missiles. And this is happening in bases all across Europe. The United States is kind of forcing them out of these defense agreements, to store these missiles and threaten to use the missiles. And so Inga Palmer is a Swedish artist. She lives in Nynäshamn in the south of Sweden. It's near Stockholm. And the translated title of this work is the Trojan Dalkalia, the Trojan horse. And the Dalkalia, well, it's a kind of a special area where the artists have for years and years and years painted horses, and they paint them very colorfully, most often red, and they decorate them with flowery garlands, and these horses are popular souvenirs in Sweden. But Inga Palmer not only painted this horse, she also made a cardboard replica of it, and she used it at a demonstration in front of the Swedish Parliament this was June 17th, 2024, in Stockholm, the day before the Parliament voted about a Defense Cooperation Act. And I think she was a prophet. She was showing what that so-called defense will bring. And nuclear weapons will never bring us defense. One of the greatest threats we face is the threat of nuclear annihilation. We also face the threat of ecological collapse. Are nuclear weapons going to help us with that? We face the prospect of new pandemics. And if we keep demonizing Russia and China and saying, oh no, our scientists can never collaborate on anything. We have to get them getting ready to kill each other. What kind of sense does that make? And so the message of the Beatitudes comes home to us again and again. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice. Blessed are ye poor, not the ones who are at the top of the tier. I want to include right now a drawing, an artwork by Sally Latch. And she's she's like Sister Jean, who's on this call. She's in her 80s and never stops creating. And quite honestly, when we first at the Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal meeting decided, we want to feature Sally's work, one of the people advising us said, no, don't do that. That woman is ugly and she looks Middle Eastern, and you should not show a picture of a frightening looking Middle Eastern woman. And I don't know, people see things with different perspectives. It seems to me Sally Latch showed outrage and anger and strength. And it's interesting to me that in some ways, although the bombing planes in the background are, overwhelming, I mean, that's the state-of-the-art weaponry that is hideous, this woman seems somehow stronger even in her grief. But it brings to us the question of anger. Who isn't feeling angry these days? Anger at the war makers, anger at the wastage, anger at the inability for public opinion manifest all around the world to try to stop these various wars. Why are we so stymied? And yet, if we become controlled by our anger, we can't channel it. So I think, brothers and sisters, it's okay that we feel angry, but I hope, recognizing that we are all part of one another, that Eucharistic faith, bread broken for one another, that we won't be controlled by our anger, that we'll be able to challenge our anger, not be reactive, but rather continually try to act in our way toward new ways of thinking and new ways of being. And we do see guidance for that. The next artwork I'd like to show, I'm so pleased to be friends with Dave Martin, and he's been, of course, trying to channel his fury and frustration over what's happening in Gaza. And so he did a lithograph of people who are so anxious just to get by with food. And when you contrast, hi, Father Joe, can you
Yeah,
mute yourself?
watching Kathy Keller. What's up?
Father Joe, press mute. There we go, he did. So Dave's lithograph contrasts quite a lot with Mr. Gamp's cartoon, where the resources get bussed to the character that you can't really see who represents war. And this is part of the result. People anxious, hungry, frightened. And certainly people in Gaza have endured that. And yet, in spite of the bereavement, the displacement, the many, many ways in which homes and hospitals and infrastructure are turned into rubble, we have seen a phenomenal determination. I think people have been shocked worldwide by the United States provisioning a mass killing spree through sending the 2,000-pound weapons, the 500-pound weapons, the laser-guided missiles, the tank-fired missiles, the rounds and rounds and rounds of it. It's just that unwavering support of explosives. And yet, the Palestinian determination to persist is really quite amazing. And I think this character, he's a medical doctor in his white coat, walking toward not one but two tanks through the rubble of what was the Kamal Adwan Hospital. We see Hussam Abu Safia expressing what reminds me actually of Jesus of Nazareth on the road to the crucifixion, and where is Simon of Cyrene? But there's the doctor, and now he's in prison, and he first was sent to a prison where his son said he was tortured. And it'll be February before the lawyers are going to be able to hear from him. We hope he's alive. But I think Dr. Hussam Abu Safia represents some of the best that is amongst us. And so there you see David Solnit's art. He's a wonderful artist out west. And 4 signs on pickets say free Dr. Abu Safia and all abducted Palestinian healthcare workers. But underneath, very importantly, if we were in Gaza, this hospital would be rubble. People are taking that sign to hospitals all across the country. And it's interesting that in Brigham, Mass, the person who's in charge of Lockheed Martin, James Tinklet, has just been appointed to the board of directors for the Brigham Mass Hospital. But there's a contradiction there, isn't there? If you want hospitals to be known as places of healing, you can't be known as a country that greenlights, as we did in the bombing of a hospital in Afghanistan called Kunduz. And following that, the Saudis bombed hospitals in Yemen. And now we see that it's become like a norm to bomb hospitals. So now Palestinians face the terrible choice. Where are they going to turn for help, for rebuilding? Is it going to be to the US as the broker of peace that sent so many weapons to Israel? Is it going to be to Saudi Arabia, which has been so predatory in its relationship to Yemen, bombing exquisite cities, bombing infrastructure, possibly causing cholera because they bombed the water sanitation treatment centers? Possibly the Saudis want nuclear weapons. And so they want to normalize relations and want the Abraham Accords to pass. These are very, very, very difficult questions. And I think we've had a lot of help trying to respond from the student movement. And I know it's been squelched and students have been threatened. In fact, they've been bullied. But think about those students in the spring who were so moved by this little girl, Hind Rajab, who at age 5 wanted to be a princess and dressed up as though she were a princess. Little Hind Rajab, with her family, was trying to escape after the Israelis had said, get out, evacuate. The family said, okay. The mother took off on foot with one of her older siblings, and she was in a car with her uncle and auntie and 3 cousins. And a missile was fired at this black Kia car. The uncle had tried to notify relatives in Germany. They had him on the phone with the Red Crescent Society in Palestine. They were trying to find out, okay, what road is safe, and the car was hit, and the uncle and the aunt and 2 of the cousins died. And an older girl, 15-year-old Laya, was alive and took the phone and talked to the Red Crescent workers. And eventually they said, we're trying to get someone to you, but we can't just send emergency relief workers out right now. They had to first coordinate with the Israeli military to make sure they didn't get killed. And so 1 hour went by, close to 2 hours. The older cousin said, I'm so scared a tank is coming closer. The car was hit again. That cousin died. Little Hind is alone and shivering and frightened and begging, please come and get me. I'm so scared. The relief workers were within 56 feet of rescuing that little girl, and their vehicle was hit by a tank-fired missile. The 2 relief workers were killed. Presumably, another missile killed, murdered Hind Rajab. It was 12 days before her mother could come and collect her remains. So when the students at Columbia took over Hamilton Hall, as soon as they got themselves established, they had already prepared this banner with the Banksy symbolism, and they threw it out the window. I think they threw love out the window. Hind's Hall, they renamed Hamilton Hall after Hind Rajab. And the Hind Rajab Foundation is now trying to bring to justice some of the people who've committed terrible war crimes in Gaza. So I want to quote the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. When evil people plot, good people must plan. But at this point, I want to also try to weave back in Jesus' teaching of love your enemies. So let's explore a little bit more about militarism just by seeing how it has been portrayed by some very, very classic artists. Peter Bruegel the Elder, The Massacre of the Innocents, painted this very, very detailed painting. His paintings were becoming really popular in the mid-16th century. The emperor wanted this particular painting, actually, but it shows a massacre. And the military, again, you don't see faces. They look like kind of a big blob. But the military people that aren't on horseback are slaughtering the children, taking children away from their mothers and cutting off their heads and going into people's homes and stealing the children. This is called the Massacre of the Innocents, based on the story of Herod, killing all of the young children, hoping to make sure that Jesus wouldn't be a threat to him. Well, when the Emperor Rudolph got his hands on this painting, he told the court painters, you know what? Fix it up, cover over all the images of children with bags of flour or pheasants or anything to disguise what the soldiers are really doing. Make it look like they're robbing the poor people, but they're not massacring them. But the son, Peter Bruegel's son, remembered what the original painting looked like, and he restored it. So it was a great, great resistance to propaganda. Now, I just want to look at this painting by Francisco Goya called The Third of May. This is a painting after insurrectionists in Madrid had risen up to oppose Napoleon's troops. And again, take a look at the military. They look like a big arachnid, like a big spider, no faces. They don't look human. And who is drawing the light, the attention, who is bathed almost as a crucifixion figure? One of the young men who has been rounded up. This was the day after the failed insurrection, and Francisco Goya was appalled at how many young lives were mown down by the marauding military troops. Well, I have a desire myself to steer away from seeing the military as, the blob with no faces. And so I'd like to recall a time in my life when I was with Cynthia Banis over there on the left, and Jerry Zawada, a very good Franciscan priest, God rest his soul, and Doug next to me, Peggy Gish from CPT, Sister Virginie Lowinger. We were with Charlie Litke and Mike Ferner from Veterans for Peace, and Kathy Breen of the Catholic Worker, and Neville Watson from Australia. And we were holding pictures of some of the most beautiful children you could ever meet. John will remember meeting some of these people whose enlarged photos we hung from the banisters of the balcony of the hotel where we stayed in Baghdad. But we brought these photos with us down to the barbed wire fence between the US soldiers and Iraq just a week before the shock and awe war began. And we were within shouting distance. And Charlie Litke, who had gotten a Purple Heart for his valor during the Vietnam War as a chaplain, and then became a pacifist, he climbed on a kind of rusted out old iron structure and he shouted at the top of his lungs. And he basically begged the soldiers, don't do it. Don't cross this border. Don't invade this country. And people all over the world were clamoring for just that. Many of you were out on the streets and begging that Iraq not be subjected to yet another war. The Iraqis who had already gone through 13 years of brutal economic war and the 1991 Desert Storm bombing. Well, the war happened. We had our banners, courage for peace, not for war, life is sacred. And in came the United States Marines. And we did get to know them face to face. They weren't a blob. Many of them were quite full of regret and some even shame for what they'd been part of. And when they first came in, they set up a checkpoint right outside that hotel where we were staying. And it was called Sharia Abu Nuwas, the boulevard. And we were at Fundak Al Fanar. And they needed showers, and the hotel owner said, okay, take turns. You can come in and take showers. And some of them would come in at 1 o'clock in the morning, and they'd want to talk to us, and I'd be trying to keep my eyes open. But I so remember some of the stories they told. And I can actually, in some ways, feel the curtain part as to why some of those young men returned home with moral injury and deeply, deeply burdened by what they'd done. One young man, he was whispering. He said, ma'am, there was one day when we didn't know, was they military or was they civilian, because we saw fatigues lying on the ground, so we shot everybody. But I hope it doesn't register here, ma'am. And we see that play out now in Gaza, in the West Bank, Ukraine, Russia. We shot everybody, but you hope it doesn't register. But it, in a way, has to register in our society because we all bear complicity. Cynthia Banas just didn't hesitate to go down with water for the newly arrived Marines, and she was wearing just this outfit, her pink coat, pink hat, and her t-shirt, "War is not the answer," and she became friends with this particular soldier. And I think it's an important, important statement. There they are, right on the bank of the river in Baghdad after the invasion had commenced. War is not the answer, never has been, never will be. One more soldier picture. I'm grateful to Frank Fromhurst and John Hegel for helping me remember the Christmas truce in World War I. Those soldiers were shooting each other, lobbing chemical weapons, knee deep in their trenches, but finally it iced over and they were able to climb out of these waterlogged trenches, and they're sharing cigarettes and photos and memories and a little brandy, and we hear of the soccer game that happened, this iconic day of truce between soldiers from both sides during the industrialized slaughter of World War I. So there we are with the United Nations displaying the incredibly beautiful quote that comes from the book of Isaiah, with sunflowers bursting out in front of it. "When shall come the day, O Lord, when they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks? Nation shall not lift the sword against nation, neither shall they continue to learn the ways of war any longer." What more can be said than to you has been said? And then another painting from Sally Latch. And if you look at the words kind of tangled up and the symbols in the woman's hair as she sheds her tears, you see bushes, war, oil, Iraq. You see fear, fear, oil, war, bombing planes, distraught mothers. It's another massacre of the innocent. But on the shoulders of the woman's gown, power to the people, power to the people. Now, the next slide, it might not quite work. It's a song that I want to play. And quite honestly, I couldn't get rid of the ad that starts the song. So you might hear some kind of, what's that? Ad language, because this comes from YouTube. But this is a song for Sarajevo, arranged by Audrey Snyder and sung by the Hal Leonard Chorale.
Blood in all the streets, running like a flood. There's nowhere to hide, nowhere that I can go. I reach out my hand, touching death itself. Just a holy day in Sarajevo.
I can hear my heart pounding like a clock, hiding Flying from the plains and from the bombing, fire from the sky burning down my life. There is no more love and no more longing. But when I close my eyes, I dream of peace. I dream of flowers on the hill. I dream I see my mother smiling. When I close my eyes, I dream of
Once I had a home, once my life was good.
Once my mother sang to me and held me.
Then the fire came, falling from the sky.
There was no one left who can protect me.
Was a wicked bird that never comes to rest, feeding on the dreams of all the children.
Was an evil bird flying in the dark. Every holy promise has been broken.
But when I close my eyes, I dream of peace. I dream of flowers on the hill.
I dream I see my mother smiling.
When I close my eyes, I dream of Can't you stop the war? Bring it to a close. You are tall and strong, and I am just a child. Can't we live in peace? Stop the flowing blood.
Make a blessed world where I can be a child.
When you close your eyes, do you dream of peace? Do you dream of flowers on the hill?
Do you dream you see your mother smiling?
When you close your eyes, do you dream of peace? When you close your eyes, do you dream of peace? Do you dream of flowers on the hill?
Do you dream you see your mother smiling?
Open up your eyes and give us
Dona nobis pacem. Well, thank you very, very much, all of you, for joining me on that path. And if there's any way that I could ever, through Zoom or other means, join you in your community working for peace, I do want to say from the deep heart's core, thank you to all of you for all that you've done again and again and again to build a world wherein it's easier to be good, wherein the children won't have to beg, bring it to a close. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Hey, everybody, please join me in a deep bow or round of applause for our friend Kathy. Thanks for the meditation and reflecting on wars and the dream of peace. And I'm very moved and grateful, as I'm sure everybody is. And I want to invite folks to ask Kathy a question or a comment. For those who are listening on the recording, we're recording this the week of the inauguration in January 2025. Kathy, I wanted to ask first about suggestions for taking some action, concrete things that you could give us, 1, 2, or 3 things, including the Afghan buddies. And as you're thinking on that, I just invite everybody, it's so what we've seen Kathy do here is step back and look at our whole country and the world way beyond Republicans or Democrats, way beyond the churches, and just say we're talking about war making as the norm now. Bombing hospitals, as she said, is just the norm. It's acceptable. So this is our reality for those of us who live in the United States, and what can we do about it? And having listened to Kathy Kelly, what I'm thinking, what I've been kind of approaching this new year is, that old quote from Buckminster Fuller, Kathy, all hands on deck. It's a new moment and redouble our efforts and everybody stand up and everyone can make a difference, but we can't sit back. And so any concrete suggestions you have for us who are listening?
Mm. Many of us have a great love for Bill Quigley, the attorney from New Orleans. His dearly beloved spouse, Debbie, recently died. But I was on a Zoom with Bill before October 7th, 2023, before the genocide against Gaza took such a vicious turn and developed so much. He said, he was asked, just your question, what can we do? And he said, follow the young people. And I think right now, you see the young people looking like, whoa, they got slapped, didn't they? They can't go anywhere on their own campuses. But let's, first of all, find ways to keep on supporting young people, encouraging young people, thanking young people, and finding out what ways they will be developing. I don't think that student movement that worked so hard to understand the ideas of divestment and, insisting that their universities tell them, where are you investing our money? How much are you investing in weapons corporations? We want to know. I don't think those students are just going to, walk away and say, oh, well, we tried. So follow the young people in their resistance to the merchants of death. And a second thing is a piece of advice from the parents of Rachel Corrie. Rachel Corrie, whose back was broken by an Israeli tank that just plowed right into her in Rafah, in the southern portion of Gaza, as she was trying to protect a home. And the Corries have thought long and hard, what can be done. And they say, if you can go to Gaza or to the West Bank, do that. And so, Al Mitty has joined the call, and he'll be leaving on February 8th, traveling along with our friend Ken Jones and his spouse Melody. Many people have just recently returned in the Chicago area. We welcomed back Craig Mooson and Chris Insera. There are delegations constantly forming, and I think that as long as Palestinians are saying, yes, come be with us, sometimes, a farm or an orchard grove can be spared because there are witnesses there. And it's not that people aren't taking a big risk, because they are. But we have blue passports when we go to places like Gaza, and many people are trapped and can't leave. John, thank you for mentioning being in relationship with people who sought refuge from war. I think that's so, so important. The United States just tore Afghanistan apart with bombing, with displacement, with exacerbating corruption in almost every direction wherever they went. And they made it more likely that the Taliban could take over, and the Taliban did. And so what are the people to do who had some vision of creating a much different country, particularly the young women who are now suffocated, silenced, literally under the burqa, and their voices, it's illegal for them even to let their voices be heard, or for their families to let their voices be heard outside the home. And that's just the beginning of it. The women are much more subject now to forced marriage, to child marriage, to being completely undereducated. And, sometimes they can be beaten or pressed into servitude, and there's no one to stand up for them. So we have tried our best, those of us who were quite grateful to have gone back and forth to Iraq as guests of the Afghan peace volunteers, to try to help them find safer havens. And the good news is a network of buddies, international, committed, has since August of 2021 met twice a month on Zoom. And we've now gotten 80 people to safer havens, and there are 21 kind of stranded in Pakistan right now. But we hope we'll get them to Portugal. The Portuguese government has approved the visas, but their immigration bureaucrats haven't signed, stamped the visas, and they're not issued. So that's one thing that people can do, that we would actually, we're short some buddies. We need a few more. So if any of you would be free to join us, ideally to come on the Zoom call, but you don't have to. Sister Jean and I are there every other Thursday, but we've got some buddies who really can never make it to these Zoom calls, and they've been very, very effective buddies. And the stories are utterly fascinating. I mean, truly reciprocal. I know a Marine in Long Island who, felt some regret over his having been stationed in Afghanistan, but he's become buddies with a young Afghan young man who's right now separated from his wife, and the two of them are close friends now. They're separated by age and distance, but they talk to each other almost every night. There are people in Australia who have become like parents to a couple who engaged in a love marriage, and it didn't really go down well with the family. And so that couple regards these people in Australia as their new parents, and they're together at least once a week, and they read Rumi poetry to each other. And fortunately, Alan in Australia is an international law person, and he has helped them seek refuge in Germany right now, where they're pleading for asylum. So that is a very life-giving thing that can be done. And I certainly know that people on this call have gone out of their way again and again to help refugees from Iraq, from Honduras, from Sudan, from Afghanistan, from Gaza, from the West Bank. And, there are so many wars going on. And when we think about it, ecological collapse is going to force even more people off of their land. Their livestock thirst to death, their crops burn out. And so we need to retool our world so that we can listen to the words of Jesus, to welcome the stranger, and not to turn somebody away. It's in some ways perhaps a particularly challenging time to be a follower of Jesus. We have so many opportunities to try to learn from Jesus. And John, I want to thank you for your book about the Gospels and nonviolence, because you just give us instance after instance, and so well written and thoughtfully portrayed. And you show how women made a big difference throughout that time of Jesus' ministry, serving the needs of people who quite often were the poorest or the most shunned.
Hey, Kathy, thanks Tell us the specifics, because I think some people here would like to do the Afghan buddy system. Like, and you want to give us your email, or what do you, how
Oh,
do you,
sure.
is there
Yeah.
a Zoom thing? Is there a website? Tell us exactly
Well,
what it would mean.
you
No,
know,
as
this one,
specifically as possible, and everybody get out a pen and paper. And if you can do
well,
this,
this
this is a real,
this
this is
isn't going
love
to
your
surprise
enemies in practice.
anybody who knew about Voices in the Wilderness. We don't have a board of directors. We don't have a president, a vice president, a treasurer. We don't have a bank account. We
They
we have
just have God. That's all that's Kathy.
yeah, we've got our Zoom
So
call.
this is
Those
Voices
were,
in the Wilderness project?
well, Voices, we closed Voices, but just when we were doing that, this kind of ballooned up. So many of the people involved had been people who were part of the Voices network, but internationally, right now, our calls encompass people from Australia, Canada, Mexico, the United States, Portugal, the UK.
So
And
can you put something in the chat? Or
yeah,
how,
I
what do
put
you,
my email in the chat. We don't have a website,
mm,
but basically, Sarah Ball is a
uh-huh.
wonderful person within the Voices Network, and she's in New York now, and I'm in Chicago. And the two of us, along with a woman on Long Island, Susan Peretti,
Mhm.
have created a sort of an orientation for buddies. And so if somebody said, yeah, all right, I'm going to try this, you might try it and say, I don't like this, or this doesn't work. But if you want to try it, you just would read over that orientation, start to come to our meetings on Thursdays at 4 o'clock Central Time, and then we'll hook you up with somebody
Wow. Oh,
who
okay.
could use a buddy. And
Yeah.
then you don't have to send money. You your buddy will appreciate it if you if you can use WhatsApp or use Zoom. Most of them use their phones now, but if you can stay in touch, they'll be very, very, very grateful. And then email also, if they speak English. So it's a little
Mhm.
challenging if the buddy doesn't speak English, but it's amazing what Google Translate can do these days.
What's your email, Kathy? And
I
did
put it
everybody
in
see
the
it?
chat there. Oh, you know what? It only went to Katie Zastic. My goodness.
Yeah. So tell
Yeah,
us and keep
yeah.
trying.
Here we
Because I saw several emails from you recently, and I can't
go.
keep track of Kathy Kelly, everybody. What's your latest email?
Well, I'd send out the minutes always. Oh, I know. We send out this to end all wars.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, so that usually has an article or something that I might have written. Oh, thank you, John. Put something in from the Marquette archives. My goodness. Okay.
So I want to make sure everybody has a chance to write you if they want. So what again is your email?
Okay, here it is. There. And I'll put my phone number down too.
Okay, friends, I hope you see that, and if you feel moved to do this, the question is, and don't listen to this, Kathy. How do we love our enemies? And Kathy's giving us a very concrete example here. We could actually have a relationship with someone who has been suffered under the U.S. bombs in Afghanistan. And you have, at some point in our lives, we all have to have a relationship with some people. It seems to me that's part of the gospel. And this is what I don't want Kathy to listen to, but and I always wondered this, and there we were walking down the main streets in Baghdad, and hundreds of people 25, 26 years ago would come running out. Kathy Kelly is here. And it just gave so much hope to the suffering people of Iraq. There was one person in the United States who they knew loved them. And I don't know if anybody else can say that, And that's what Jesus was wanting. That's what I'm saying, Kathy, don't listen. This is an example, and we all want to learn from Kathy about how do we have relationships with actual human beings in Iraq, Afghanistan, Gaza, Palestine, Yemen. we could talk, Kathy, too, about Sudan and the wars in Africa, maybe Haiti, maybe even Mexico, maybe even Colombia. Now you could go on and on. That's my little pitch. Does anybody have a question for Kathy Kelly? Otherwise, I'm going to keep talking and asking Kathy questions, and nobody wants that.
Well, could I just note, I want to thank people who put ideas in the chat. In fact, there's a pledge that Jack Gilroy has been emphasizing, that so that young people can sign this pledge and say that they're not going to be part of any kind of war. And, you know, after World War I, there were students, I think 60,000 students had taken an oath never to be involved in war. And there was quite a lot going on. The Nye Commission, run by Senator Nye, had 200 hearings to see whether or not these large corporations that sold weapons were guilty of having dragged the United States into a war that they never should have been dragged into. So that there is some precedent
Yeah.
to people, you know, forming across the, you know, I think about those tables in that first cartoon we looked at, but students and laborers and farmers and former soldiers were coming together quite remarkably. And that's when groups like Women's International League for Peace and Freedom and the Wobblies and some of these other groups were gaining strength.
Kathy, you began by saying that Jim Forrest encouraged you to use art, and you were wondering how to communicate with people. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was thinking about that this morning. Every time I've been around the world in war zones, I always left thinking, wow, the job is how do we communicate what our country is doing here to these beautiful people? How do we take the message home? And it's led me to write books and give talks, but I'm making it all up. And I wonder if you could reflect on that, and that I saw you experiment with that using those powerful art pieces. You know, that happened to me first in 1985, when I lived in El Salvador, in the heart of the war zone, under the Jesuits who were later killed. And I was in grad school at Fordham. And when I came back, in fact, the students had brought somebody from CSPIS to give a talk at Fordham on El Salvador. And I thought, great. And I went to the talk. And the poor young guy, who was about 28, was just awful. I mean, he's a great human being, but the speech was terrible. And half the people left, and no one did anything for El Salvador. And I remember thinking, that was not helpful. That didn't make me want to work to end the U.S. war in El Salvador. And I think a real large part of our mission in the United States is trying to inspire and wake people up, to get them up and about and out doing something publicly against our country's war making. So can you share any more thoughts about how do we communicate the message? And maybe a lot of it is going back to the peace vigils. I liked your peace vigils there, your pictures of them. And I think maybe that's just a requirement now to live in the United States, that we all have to be once a week, go and stand on the corner and get 10 people and hold up signs. It's just like you go to church on Sunday mornings, and, you know, Jim and Shelley Douglas since 2000 been at their street corner on Saturday nights. It's just part of life. What do you think?
I think that's extremely important. And I think that particularly now, when the federal government seems to be kind of seeded with characters who have contempt for a lot of the values that we might want to promote, sharing resources, living simply, engaging in nonviolent direct action. It's a very important time then, I think, to look locally. Maybe we aren't going to be able to tackle Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Warren Buffett and, you know, these billionaires, but they are a minority in this country, and we can locally perhaps have more of a voice. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. And then I think also strengthen the faith-based connections that we do have, and keep on nurturing the possibility that the people who get up in the pulpits and have so much of an opportunity to influence people will follow Pope Francis. Every day, Pope Francis calls the community that's living, the Catholic Palestinian community, it's, I think, an Orthodox Catholic group living in Gaza. He calls them every single day, asks them, what'd you have for dinner tonight? Enjoys their children. I think the children think he's their grandfather. So if people in our faith-based communities want to be in communion with the Pope and with some of the bishops like Bishop Wester and Bishop McElroy, they have opportunities, but they have to start to, talk about the issues over which we should all be praying together. So, write those letters, make those calls. And then education, just keep on educating people, because a lot of folks, they just don't know. If you were to ask them, even after all that's gone on, if you said, could you please find Gaza on a map, a lot of people would be hard pressed. So to educate but to do so with humility. If you ask me to name all the capitals in Africa, sorry, I'm out. I can't do it. I wish I could, but I can't. I
So-
saw Sister Jean's hand up.
Yeah, Sister Jean, you can unmute yourself
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
you go.
Well, I think another thing to do is that song so touched me, Kathy, the beautiful song, to imagine. Our imagination is so important. To imagine the world of peace together. So not just resisting, not just saying no, but saying yes. Giving another example, all the places where the new world is beginning. I relate a lot to agriculture. Regenerative agriculture is helping the soil to live. Doing those positive things. Not that resistance is not positive. I'm not saying that, but not to just think of the no. Where are the yeses in your community, relating to all the people who are, and imagining this world of peace, because it will exist if our imagination creates, that's Teilhard de Chardin. We create the future, we are building the future. So which one are we building? And so giving those examples and encouraging imagination, that's where the that art, Kathy, that you shared, those cartoonists, that kind of imagination that created that. So people, the children on their phones now, they're wonderful in communication, yes, but it's also dulling their imagination, because when I watch what they're watching they're always watching other people do things. They're never doing it themselves. And so their imagination is being lost. And it's so important to imagine. Remember that song, Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. Because what we're meant to do is to create the heaven here on earth, not just imagine where we're going. So, and a day like today, and all of you folks, all your beautiful faces, it is heaven. We are living in another world, because the world we're creating just by being here and listening and taking in and acting. And that world is through computers, because technology is so wonderful. but it's how we use it. And so we're connecting with people all over the world, and we're finding such wonderful, beautiful people everywhere. So I would vote for imagination.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you.
And
Kathy,
Jean,
any thoughts?
Well, you know, Jean's agriculture work was always welcoming to children. And the children would come and she'd show them worms and she'd show them, you know, getting their hands dirty. But they became tuned into permaculture, and then they took that back to their family homes and to their dinner tables. And it was really quite a mission of both education and, I think, apostleship. And the permaculture community worldwide is really like hand in glove with our refugee efforts. The first group that went over to Portugal went to southern Portugal, and they were invited to practice their permaculture skills, which they had, you know, they weren't great, but they had the seeds. They turned an arid, desertified patch of land into an area that's thriving with flowers and crops and herbs. And they managed to, using a greenhouse, to cultivate plants, which then they put in the ground. And it's just, it was a wonderful experience. And they were part of a community that embraced them. So most of them are still quite eager. A larger contingent went to a smaller urban area for the next contingent that went to Portugal, but they were quite eager to go out and work in gardens. And I noticed Mike Wisniewski of the LA Catholic Workers says our only option is to form community. And before him in the chat, Art Laffin is also talking about the communities that are based on reform and repentance and resistance. And while we're thinking about artwork, I also want to thank Art for co-editing with Carol Sargent a book of Anne Montgomery's poetry. And maybe, Art, you might want to put in the chat the title of the book and how people could acquire it, because it's really quite encouraging to see how Anne's life of discipleship took her to very, very difficult situations, and always she called on people to join her in nonviolent direct action. I saw Joanne and Nancy.
Let's go with Joanne and then Nancy.
Joanne, you're muted.
I mentioned earlier in the session that I wanted to invite Kathy, but the invitation really holds to all of you. Jim and I are in the Seattle area, and we have a lot of peace efforts out here, as you do in your areas, but we're trying to organize a big conference. We really are very much interested in bringing out the stars, and you are all the stars. Either live if you're close enough or want to visit Seattle, or if you can join us on Zoom. We are making provisions to have youth. If you couldn't come, but you could get youth to participate in the conference, they'll be hearing a whole range of voices. And that's why we're inviting Kathy, when I get a chance to talk to her specifically, to be part of this effort. I mean, we have Nobel Prize winners. We'll have some of the people who have been where the communities have been affected. So we're doing, everything from atomic soldiers to Marshallese to Hibakusha. We'll have authors, we'll have politicians, we'll have a whole range of people, educators. I mean, I think it'll be a glorious event. And especially it is targeted to people who don't know this group. And that's why we need you to try to help support it. And people who say, oh, I don't know much about it. Well, you can Zoom and find out. Or you could pay their way, and we'll try to have provisions of housing, both in hotels, if you can afford the hotel, or not, if we can do boarding, provisions.
Joanne, how can people find out about your conference? Can you put info in the chat?
Yeah, I put in the chat, there's a Tiny Ural website. It's called tinyural.com, no nuke PNW for Pacific Northwest, or Pacific Nuclear Weapons.
Is this an in-person conference you're organizing?
Both, both.
And
we're
what are the
trying to have
dates?
the April 11th and 12th is going to be in a church that can accommodate 700 people, folks. So we're going to have the space.
So
Okay.
Carolyn, who lives up your way, is saying the link doesn't work. Is that right, Carolyn? So you can check her out, check her in the chat.
Okay. If I didn't do it right, oh, I know. I left out a period. It's
Yeah, there you go. Thank you, Carolyn.
period.com.
Say
Okay.
it again.
Tiny Ural, TINY. I'll do it again, but it's TINY period dot COM, tiny dot com slash no nuke PNW, but I'll put it back in the chat. The chat
Okay.
exists, just put in a period in between tinyurl and .com.
Okay, thanks, Joanne. Let's go on to Nancy. Maybe you have a question for Kathy. And anybody else, I'm going to call on a few people if you don't. Nancy, welcome.
Quick thank you for the amazing art, and I have been the torture of Dr. Abu Safia is just, it's heartbreaking. He has Kazakhstan citizenship. He could have left, but he was really the last, as I understand it, standing. And that picture, but that you draw the comparison to Christ really hit me today. That image has been with me since the 27th when he was taken. But I hope others have heard about it. I haven't Googled it yet this morning, but my understanding is in Geneva, in front of the UN quarters there and near our embassy, Doctors Against Genocide and some other human rights groups are doing this amazing tent city, putting up the silky thin tents that these poor Gazans have been having to live in through the freezing weather. And they're doing a lie-in of being in prison, the handcuffs and being tortured. And so I'm going to try to Google later. I haven't gotten I follow Doctors Against Genocide, but I haven't had a link yet come by this morning. But, and you talked about students, couple quick things. A very good friend has a daughter at Barnard, and it's scary to me what Jess is telling me, that poor Sarah, who wants to follow this movement, she has to go outside the gates of Barnard, and they have to be very careful to mask themselves and stay as much on the edges, or they won't get back into Barnard. And some very scary stories that Sarah's having to live with of older students who got locked out of their dorms last year just before exams and couldn't get back in to pass. So I hardly say follow them, but I also say send them prayers. I mean, she's been on my heart anyway, but especially after what Jess told me, and that Jess keeps getting letters to parents. We are protecting our students. No, it's McCarthyism again. We're not letting them talk. Anyway, and lastly, I just wish one of you, I keep thinking of Desmond Tutu's words, stay out of fear and anger and go to grief and joy. And I'm trying that. But the visions of the 1,500 Proud Boys being released really I'm fighting fear. And I'd love some encouragement, further encouragement, how we really stand for peace against these very hurtful, vengeful people. They're very hurt in themselves, but they want to do damage out of that hurt. So, and then the poor priest at the cathedral, Buddy, is under attack, not the man she was talking to. It's kind of crazy, but thank you, Kathy, and we carry on, I guess.
Thank you, Nancy. Kathy, any comments?
Well, I do wonder, for those.
Turn up your volume, Kathy.
Oh, sorry. For those who were inside the prison system recently, as people who were sentenced to prison and were released. Maybe inside the prison, they might have gained some insights. I found that prison was very, very educational for me. I also wonder about the advice actually that Bill Griffin at the New York Catholic Worker gave me. Trump had just been elected, and I went to New York and joined their vigil, which they have every Saturday morning regarding Yemen and other wars since they started in 2017. And he pulled me aside and he said, Kathy, don't react to every outrage. There will be so many of them, you'll burn yourself out. And I've been grateful to Bill for that advice. I think we're in for it. It's going to be a very, very rocky road. But to some extent, I think we can see, and again, I think about these young people, they caught courage from one another. We catch courage from one another. And, you know, if it seems completely bleak, that's a learning experience too. You know, people who went through enslavement and people who were, you know, denied the vote as suffragists, and people who were union leaders who were imprisoned, and people who were in the civil rights movement and were beaten, and, you know, some were killed. Sometimes that is also, in the bleakness, a learning experience.
Thank you, Kathy. Let's go to John with your hand up. Hey, John, how are you doing? Welcome. And go ahead and unmute yourself, John.
Thank you very much. Kathy, I wanted to follow up on your suggestion from Bill Quigley to follow the youth. And this also relates to your mentioning Jack Kilroy and his offering this conscientious objector registry. Our Association of Catholic Priests in the United States, and I see that Bob and Donna Cushing are here. Bob is the chair of that. We are cooperating with and collaborating with Jack and Mark Sevilla Carver, who's a member of our working group, in fostering that registry in the name of, in memory of Mark, or in memory of Ben Salmon. And the hope is that we'll be able to make that something even that the bishops might accept as something that young people can take as almost a confirmation, or hopefully at some point even baptismal commitment, that I will not only not engage in war, but I will not engage in working for war machines and for the companies that produce war materials of any kind. So we'll keep, well, there's a way we could keep that informed, or how that moves along. Maybe perhaps, John, I don't know, we can let you know, or just.
You know, John, I think that many of the Pax Christi chapters would also be very open to that pledge and to what Jack has been so brilliantly calling for. And I also want to say that Jack wrote a play which is about drone warfare, but it's just a 2-actor play, a mother and a daughter. And the mother is a general who is a drone operator, or she wants to become a general. And the daughter goes to Fordham and starts to think, well, maybe these drones aren't such a good idea. But anyway, it's the acting was so superb. They performed it at the Mary House Catholic Worker, but Jack would be very happy to share that play with people as well. And so whatever can reach to the young people is so, so, so important. John, did you want to put anything in the chat that would help?
Right now, we're only at the point of trying to draft it in a way that will be acceptable to Pax Christi and to some of the bishops that we know and trust. And so it'll probably be after that. I can send that to you through Bob and Donna and our working group, Kathy.
Great.
Thank you so much for mentioning the young people.
Thank you, John. I wanted to call on Frank now. So, friends, Frank is the author of the biography of Bishop Gumbleton you may have seen. And I hope you don't mind this, but he's in the midst of now doing a biography of Kathy, which is great. So we can tell Kathy's story to many people. I wanted to ask Frank, having heard Kathy today, if you had any questions for her right now. And you don't have to, you can pass. We're all nonviolent here.
Thank you, John. Well, just want to share the wonderful spirit that you've all shared here today. I think, Kathy's a very moving person, and that's the most important message, that we be moved by one another. So I don't really have a question. I'm just kind of overwhelmed by the beauty and the hope, and reminded, I guess, that as we are more aware of so much of the history of somebody like Kathy Kelly, we can find deep well springs for the work going forward. Thank you for your good work, each of you. And I know now I need to get that book you've written. John, tell us again the title. I know it's widely recognized, but what's the name of the book on the Gospels, John?
My book?
Yeah.
The Gospel of Peace. Great. Well, would anybody else have a question? Al, you're heading off to Palestine. Do you want to tell us a little bit about it, or if anyone wanted to go, what group you're going with and so forth?
And John, I just want to point out that Joe Mattern's hand is up also.
Okay, and then Joe will call on you.
Great.
Al, any thoughts, Al?
Yeah, just it's community peacemakers teams. The delegation, excuse me, starts on February 14th, but I think we're leaving to get to Palestine on February 9th. There will be 5 of us going, along with 2 people in Hebron, but there's room for more. So, and John, can I make a little joke about your book?
It depends.
I had the pleasure of seeing and meeting with David Hartso in San Francisco last month at Christmas time, and he and I were walking through Golden Gate Park, and somehow this book came up, and David, in his kind of wit, said, "Did you read the whole thing?" And I said, "Well, I got to half of Luke in the book, but I use it every month when my wife and I write scripture reflections. So I use this as my key reference in writing reflections on scripture." So, but David thought it was thinks it's a long book, apparently.
Hey, we're talking about Kathy Kelly here today. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, that sounds like David. Hey, Al, best wishes on the trip. Really great that you're going.
Thank you.
Did Jean Matern, you say, have a question, Kathy?
Joe.
Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, everybody. Thank you so much. We're both Pax Christi and Catholic worker, and Kathy Kelly baptized us when we started our Catholic worker here at the only Catholic worker house in the Green Bay Diocese. Thank you, Kathy, and thank you for your presentation. And Kathy, I thought it was significant that you began your work by pointing to art. And Dorothy Day says, the world will be saved by beauty. And I think that's a very provocative statement. It's going to work. It's going to work, and God's going to win. And also, John, we are reading your book with our Pax Christi, studying it. So thank you very much for that, the Gospel of Peace. And I just wanted to say that, and for this wonderful program. I can't go to Palestine, but I'm there in spirit every day. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. And you can help this project by, helping to spread the word about the beatitudecenter.org, and also my new podcast, which is totally free every week. James Manista, we have a question for Kathy, and then Jean, and then we got to wrap it up.
I wanted to tell Kathy that I respond very positively to her mention of someone in the prior peace movements of making a pledge and then possibly wearing an armband. I was going to suggest a white armband. It would cost very little. A lot of people can't afford to do cross country, much less international travel for peace. It would be non-denominational. It could be adopted by every peace organization. It's as simple as standing around outside of a fabric store and saying, "Hey, white armband is good." Would you be able to talk that up and get it started? Because
Thanks,
it's a
Jane.
very immediate public demonstration of commitment that would be open to everyone and not necessarily peace specialists, but to everyone with that sympathy.
Thank you,
Thank you,
James.
Kathy.
You know, I think about Vera Brittain. She was a student at Oxford before World War I began. And she was so enamored by the idea of patriotically marching off to the war, and her fellow students went off to the war, and her fiance and her brother. She lost her brother, her fiance, and two of their closest friends. They were a tight little circle, and all the young men were killed. And she had gone off to the front to be a nurse and wore the armband. And when she came back into her Oxford life, she continued to wear that armband. And so I think you're right. It's got an identity, an identification. And Vera Brittain wanted to say no to all wars ever after. So thank you. I think
Thank you.
we all can identify ourselves. I also just want to mention that if you ever do go in the Midwest up to Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and visit Casa Esther, ask Father Joe Matern if he wouldn't play his jazz sax. He's a wonderful jazz musician.
We can get the last comment or question briefly, Jean, because we're over time. So
Yeah, I wish I were better at putting things in the link in the chat, but my computer skills are very limited. But I want to tell you about this, and I hope you really do listen to it. Chris Hedges interviewed two students from MIT, PhD candidates. Don't miss it. I'm sure you can just Google it and find it. Chris Hedges and interviewing two students from MIT. And what MIT, we all know that MIT has always been involved with war making and, weapons, but this is unbelievable how these two young, because when Kathy says follow the youth, this is how if you follow them, and maybe someone can also do something for them because they're risking their whole careers and all the work they've put into their education, and
thank you, Jean.
they're close to being expelled. So just watch it, and they're so you'll be inspired by them.
Thank you. Thank you, Jean.
So friends, we need to wrap it up. And how about joining me in a very warm thanks to our friend Kathy for being here today and sharing with us and meditating with us on the world of war and the call to peace. And I'm so grateful, Kathy. Can I just give a little 1-minute commercial break, which is the next Zoom will be, we're switching gears. We had Carrie Kennedy a couple of weeks ago on human rights, and now Kathy on war and peace. And we're going to have Marissa Guerin, who was here 2 years ago, who's kind of a global expert on Thérèse of Lisieux, talking about the way and practice of merciful love and nonviolence in everyday life. And then maybe you saw in March and April, I'm going to do a 5-week course on the Gospel of John. I just couldn't help myself. I couldn't resist. So you don't have to come, but you're very welcome. I'm going to be there, even if it's just me. And then, and I have this weekly Zoom now, which it's only had 3 episodes and I've had 2,000 downloads in 20 countries. I've had Martin Sheen and Bernard Lafayette, and
Helen Prejean.
this Monday will be Helen Prejean, and then Richard Rohr, and then a 3-week series with Joan Chittister on the Beatitudes. And it's all free, and it's on 15 different platforms. You could all help me by telling everybody about it. If people don't know where to go, they can go to the beatitudecenter.org, but also Spotify and Apple or the National Catholic Reporter. It's on the front page of the NCR every Monday. So there's something new I'm trying to do, and I need your support to help spread the word about that. Because we've had such great people. We should really have 100,000 people listening to them. They're just amazing.
What
And Kathy,
time
you'll have to
on-
come and do your time on the Nonviolent Jesus podcast too someday. So, hey, everybody, thanks so much. We go forward in peace and we'll pray for one another. We're not going to get discouraged or despairing or afraid. We're going to stay faithful and keep speaking out and doing what we can for peace, like Kathy and Jesus. So if you want to stay on after the recording ends, you're welcome to. Otherwise, take care. God bless you. Bye-bye, and see you next time. Okay,
Thank you.
bye-bye,
Thank you,
everybody.
John.